When my sister Hannah lost her baby at 8 months pregnant, she touched my belly at the funeral and whispered, "At least one of us gets to be a mom." 3 weeks after I gave birth, I found her in the nursery at 3:00 a.m., breastfeeding my daughter because she'd been taking hormones to induce lactation since my third trimester. Then she started calling my baby by her dead daughter, Emma's name, and I discovered she'd applied for a new birth certificate listing herself as the mother. My sister Hannah had always been the one who took care of everyone. After Mom died when we were teenagers, she basically raised me, even though she was only 3 years older. She'd braid my hair for school and pack my lunches with little notes that said things like, "You're going to do great on your math test today." So when she lost her baby girl at 8 months pregnant, watching her world shatter felt like watching the sun go dark. I was 6 months pregnant myself when it happened. At the funeral for baby Emma, Hannah touched my belly with shaking hands and whispered, "At least one of us gets to be a mom." The way she said it made my chest tighten, but I told myself it was just grief talking. Her therapist said she had complicated grief, which made sense since she had to watch me grow bigger while she planned a funeral instead of a nursery. When I had my daughter, Nora, Hannah showed up at our door with a car full of freezer meals and offered to help. My husband, David, thought it was too soon, but I couldn't turn her away. She needed this, and honestly, we needed the help. Those first weeks, Hannah was incredible. She took the 3 a.m. feeding shift without a single complaint and kept this detailed log in the baby app of every ounce Nora ate. Her therapist even called to tell me how beautifully Hannah was channeling her grief into supporting us. Mom couldn't stop gushing about how Hannah was turning her pain into love. She bought all the best baby gear and spent hours researching recalls. "I just want her safe," she'd say while installing another baby monitor. She made these beautiful photo albums documenting every tiny milestone, and everyone said how therapeutic it must be for her. There were little things, though. She started calling Nora our baby, but would quickly laugh and say, "Takes a village, right?" She knew her schedule better than I did, but everyone just said how lucky I was to have such devoted help. On social media, she called herself Mama Bear, but added, "Just proud auntie things," with a heart emoji. David mentioned she was always at our house, but I defended her, saying she needed purpose right now. Everything changed around week 3. I woke up at 3 a.m. to an empty crib and found Hannah in the rocking chair with Nora latched to her chest. She was crying, and "You needed sleep," she said, like it was totally normal that she was somehow producing milk. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. The next morning, I found her pumping in our bathroom. She'd been taking hormones to induce lactation since my third trimester. I started finding my pumped milk dumped down the sink while the fridge filled with bottles labeled in her handwriting. I tried confronting her gently. She sobbed and said, "I just want to feel like a mother again. Please don't take this from me." I felt so guilty that I let it slide. But then I noticed all our family photos had been edited. My face was cut out and replaced with pictures of Hannah. She'd been sleep training Nora to only settle with her scent. She'd scream unless she held her. She installed a baby monitor in her room and disconnected mine, so I couldn't even check on my own daughter without going through her. I found her medical records on the counter where she told doctors she had phantom baby syndrome and needed to bond with a baby to heal. She'd legally changed her name to Helen, which was close enough to mine that she could claim typos on documents. The worst part was when I caught her calling Nora by Emma's name when she thought I wasn't listening. David finally called my parents to intervene, but Hannah had coached Nora to reach for her when she was upset. My parents just said, "See, she knows her caregiver." I found paperwork at the pediatrician where she'd listed herself as the biological mother, claiming it was a clerical error. She'd been recording me constantly and editing videos to make me look neglectful while she appeared devoted. Then I discovered she'd been dosing my coffee with her antipsychotics, which explained why I'd been so foggy while she seemed completely put together. When I tried to evict her, she completely snapped. She stripped naked, showing her C-section scar, and screamed, "This proves she's mine. You're trying to steal my baby again." She'd convinced herself that her baby hadn't died. and that I'd somehow taken Emma while she was unconscious. I found adoption papers where she'd listed herself as birth mother and forged my signature as a surrogate agreement. She'd been meeting with lawyers about reclaiming her child from an unstable relative. She filed a false CPS report posing as a concerned aunt. The breaking point came when I walked in on her live streaming to a mommy group while breastfeeding Nora. "Finally reunited with my daughter," she was saying to hundreds of viewers. I checked her documents and found she'd applied for a new birth certificate, listing her as mother. That night I found her trying to tattoo her initials on Nora's foot with a needle and ink, so she'll always know her real mom, she said when I screamed. I grabbed Nora and ran to my car to drive to my lawyer's office. When I came back 2 hours later for our things, the house was empty. Every single baby item was gone. In the crib was a note, "Gone to raise my daughter without interference. Thanks for carrying her for me." The police station was my first stop, but they couldn't issue an Amber Alert since Hannah was listed as a caregiver on multiple documents. The officer kept looking at the forged paperwork she'd filed showing her as Nora's biological mother. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. David was pacing the empty nursery when I got back. He'd already called every hotel within 100 miles, but Hannah had planned this too well. She'd been using cash for weeks, stockpiling baby supplies and storage units I didn't know about. The credit cards she'd been using were all in her new name, Helen. I started with her therapist, but doctor-patient confidentiality meant she couldn't tell me anything. The receptionist did mention Hannah had canceled all future appointments last week, saying she was moving for a fresh start. My stomach dropped when I realized how long she'd been planning this. My parents arrived within hours. Mom clutching tissues and Dad looking lost. They kept asking how this happened, how we missed the signs. Mom admitted Hannah had been asking about custody laws and grandparent rights, but she thought it was just grief talking. Dad remembered Hannah mentioning a cabin rental website but couldn't recall which one. I tore through Hannah's old room, searching for any clue. Under her mattress, I found printouts of mommy blogs about starting over after loss. She'd highlighted sections about small towns being perfect for raising children away from toxic family members. There were apartment listings circled in 3 different states. David's sister, Tiffany, came over with her laptop. She was good with computers and started searching social media for any trace of Hannah's new identity. We found the mommy group live stream archived, but Hannah had been careful not to show any identifying landmarks. Tiffany noticed the curtains in the background looked like standard motel patterns. I called every pediatrician within driving distance, warning them about forged medical records. Most couldn't discuss patient information, but one receptionist quietly mentioned a woman matching Hannah's description had called about transferring records for a baby named Emma. She'd asked about practices that didn't require previous documentation. The baby tracker app still showed Hannah's last entries. She'd been logging feeds and diaper changes obsessively until 3 hours ago when the entries stopped. David noticed she'd been gradually changing Nora's schedule, shifting her to eat and sleep at different times than what we'd established. She'd been training our daughter for a different routine. Tiffany found Hannah's car listed for sale online with a pickup scheduled for tomorrow. The buyer lived 2 states away and had already wired a deposit. When we called him, he said the seller seemed desperate for quick cash and had offered to deliver the car herself. He gave us the meeting location at a rest stop off the interstate. I went through our bank statements and discovered Hannah had been making small withdrawals for months, always just under the amount that would trigger alerts. She'd also been buying prepaid phones and having packages delivered to a P.O. box I didn't know existed. When I called the post office, they said the box had been closed yesterday with a forwarding address to general delivery in another town. Mom remembered Hannah asking about our family medical history last month, specifically about hereditary conditions. She'd wanted copies of everything for her therapist, supposedly. Now I realized she'd been building a complete medical file to present herself as Nora's biological mother to new doctors. David found her laptop hidden in the garage. Most files were deleted, but Tiffany recovered fragments showing Hannah had been researching home births and midwives who worked off the grid. She'd bookmarked articles about mothers who successfully hid from family members they claimed were abusive. She'd been building a narrative where I was the dangerous one. The adoption lawyer Hannah had consulted called back. He said she'd presented a convincing case about being coerced into giving up her baby. She'd shown him edited videos and recordings that made it seem like I'd manipulated a grieving woman. He'd advised her to gather more evidence before proceeding, which explained all the hidden cameras we'd been finding. I checked the mommy support groups online and found Hannah had been active in several under her new name. She'd been posting for weeks about reuniting with her daughter after family members tried to steal her. The comments were all supportive, telling her to do whatever it took to get her baby back. I'm curious why everyone kept dismissing such strange behavior, calling Nora our baby, and basically living at their house seems like more than just grief. The lactation thing is where this gets really weird. How long does it take to make that happen? She'd cultivated an entire network of people who believed her version. Tiffany discovered Hannah had interviewed for several nanny positions in different cities. She'd used our address as a reference, intercepting the calls when we weren't home. One family said she'd seemed perfect, but had suddenly withdrawn her application last week, saying she'd had a family emergency. They mentioned she'd asked detailed questions about their neighborhood's privacy. The storage unit company called David back. They had 3 units rented under variations of Helen's name, all paid up for 6 months in advance. Security footage showed Hannah loading baby items over the past month. The manager couldn't let us in without a warrant, but mentioned one unit had a climate control upgrade, suggesting she'd stored formula and pumped milk. I remembered Hannah had borrowed our camera memory cards to make photo albums. When I checked our computer, I found she'd copied thousands of photos, but selectively deleted ones showing me caring for Nora. She'd been crafting a digital history where she was the primary caregiver, and I was barely present. The timestamps had been altered to support her narrative. My best friend from college called. She'd seen Hannah at a gas station 4 hours away, buying diapers and formula. Hannah had been wearing a wig and sunglasses, but my friend recognized her walk. She tried to approach, but Hannah had hurried to a car I didn't recognize. The license plate was muddy and unreadable. David contacted the car rental companies. One finally admitted a woman matching Hannah's description had rented a sedan using Helen's ID. She'd paid cash for a month-long rental with unlimited mileage. The GPS had been disabled at her request for privacy reasons. They had no way to track the vehicle. I found Hannah's planner hidden in the basement. She'd been documenting every interaction with Nora for months, but from a mother's perspective. Every entry referred to Nora as Emma and described recovering from the trauma of having her baby stolen. The delusion was complete and meticulously detailed. She'd even logged developmental milestones that aligned with her lost pregnancy timeline. Tiffany pulled up Hannah's browser history from cached files. She'd researched squatters' rights and tenant laws in multiple states. She'd looked up how long before a missing person case goes cold and what documents were needed to enroll a child in school without previous records. She'd been planning to disappear completely and start fresh. The Brass Pump Company had Hannah's new address on file for warranty registration. When we drove there, it was a mail forwarding service that redirected to another forwarding service. The trail was deliberately convoluted. The clerk mentioned Hannah had seemed paranoid about privacy, paying extra for anonymous forwarding. I called Hannah's college roommate, who mentioned Hannah had asked to borrow her cousin's RV last month for a camping trip. The cousin lived 3 states away and hadn't heard from Hannah since she picked it up. He described it as old but reliable, perfect for staying off the grid. He'd thought it was weird she'd paid him triple the asking price in cash. David's brother, Robert, was a private investigator and started making calls to his contacts. He found Hannah had been asking about fake ID sources on some questionable forums. She'd also inquired about birth certificate modifications and how to establish residency quickly in new states. She'd been thorough in learning how to disappear. The diaper delivery service showed regular shipments to our house had stopped, but new orders were going to various Amazon lockers under Helen's account. The pattern showed she was moving steadily west, picking up supplies every few hundred miles. She was being careful not to stay anywhere too long. I went through Nora's clothes and realized Hannah had been slowly replacing them with identical items in slightly larger sizes. She'd been preparing for Nora to grow during their time away. The tags were from different stores across multiple states, bought over weeks. She'd thought of everything. Mom called Hannah's high school friend who worked at a bank. She quietly confirmed Hannah had closed several accounts and withdrawn substantial cash over the past month. She'd mentioned starting fresh after trauma, and the bank staff had been sympathetic. The amounts were just under federal reporting requirements. Tiffany found Hannah posting in a forum for mothers estranged from toxic families. She'd shared our edited photos as proof of neglect and gained sympathy from other members. Several had offered her places to stay if she needed to escape. She'd thanked them, but said she had a safe plan. The pediatrician Hannah had been seeing for her phantom pregnancy called back. She said Hannah had been incredibly convincing, showing up with all the symptoms of postpartum depression. She'd prescribed medication that Hannah claimed helped her feel like herself again. The doctor felt terrible for being deceived. I remembered Hannah had a storage locker at her old gym. When we checked, we found she'd been keeping a go bag with cash, prepaid phones, and duplicate documents. There were receipts for baby supplies shipped to general delivery addresses in small towns along major highways. She'd created a supply chain for her escape. David noticed our spare car keys were missing along with the garage door opener Hannah had borrowed months ago. She'd been collecting access to our lives while planning her exit. The house felt violated in ways we were still discovering. Every room held evidence of her deception. As night fell, I sat in Nora's empty nursery holding the one stuffed animal Hannah had left behind. It was the bear she bought for Emma, the one she'd clutched at the funeral. Pinned to it was a note in Hannah's handwriting. She was always meant to be mine. I'm just taking back what God intended. I clutched the bear tighter as exhaustion overwhelmed me. David found me there an hour later, still holding Emma's bear while tears streaked my face. He pulled me up gently, and we stumbled to our bedroom where neither of us slept. Morning brought renewed determination. Tiffany arrived early with printouts of Hannah's forum posts. She'd mapped out a timeline showing Hannah's posts grew more delusional each week. The other mothers in her support group had been encouraging her fantasy, validating her belief that I'd stolen her baby. One member had even offered Hannah a cabin in Montana. I drove to the rest stop where Hannah was supposed to meet the car buyer. David followed in his truck while Tiffany monitored Hannah's online activity from home. We waited 4 hours, but Hannah never showed. The buyer called frustrated, saying the seller had texted about car trouble and rescheduled for next week. Back home, I found a package on our doorstep with no return address. Inside was a photo of Nora sleeping in an unfamiliar crib. Hannah had drawn hearts around it and written "Safe with Mommy" now on the back. My hands trembled as I studied every detail in the photo for clues. The wallpaper looked generic, probably another motel. Mom called crying. Hannah had contacted her, claiming I'd been abusing Nora and she'd rescued her. Mom didn't believe it initially, but Hannah had sent edited videos that looked convincing out of context. She'd spliced together footage to make it seem like I was rough with Nora during diaper changes. Mom was confused and wanted to hear my side. I spent 2 hours showing Mom the original videos on my phone, proving Hannah's edits. Dad looked sick when he realized how thoroughly Hannah had planned this. He remembered teaching us both video editing software years ago for a school project. Hannah had paid attention to every detail. Tiffany's husband worked in IT and offered to help trace Hannah's digital footprint. He found she'd been using public Wi-Fi at libraries and coffee shops to post online. The IP addresses formed a path heading northwest. She was being careful, but not careful enough. We had a direction. David wanted to take time off work to search for them, but I worried about money. We'd already spent hundreds on gas and hotels checking leads. His boss was understanding, but patience would run out eventually. We needed to find Nora before our resources did. The mommy group moderator reached out after Tiffany reported Hannah's posts. She was horrified to learn she'd been enabling a kidnapping. She provided Hannah's private messages where she'd mentioned specific landmarks. Hannah had described passing a distinctive water tower shaped like a coffee pot. Tiffany found it on a map, a small town 6 hours away. We packed immediately. Robert met us there with more information. His contacts had spotted someone matching Hannah's description at a laundromat. She'd been washing baby clothes and talking to herself, calling the baby Emma. The owner remembered her because she'd paid in quarters and seemed paranoid about security cameras. The trail led to a weekly rental motel on the outskirts of town. My heart pounded as we checked each room's window for signs of baby items. David spotted formula containers through a gap in curtains at room 12. We'd found them. I wanted to rush in immediately, but Robert counseled old patience. Hannah was unstable and might run with Nora if startled. We needed a plan. Tiffany would knock pretending to be housekeeping while David and I waited by the back exit. Robert positioned himself by Hannah's rental car. The door opened slightly when Tiffany knocked. I heard Hannah's voice, suspicious and higher-pitched than normal. Tiffany maintained her cover, mentioning fresh towels. Hannah refused, but Tiffany glimpsed inside. She saw Nora in a portable crib wearing clothes I didn't recognize. Hannah had even dyed Nora's sparse hair darker. Hannah must have sensed something because she suddenly slammed the door. Hannah's spiral from grieving sister to master criminal reads like someone binged too many spy movies while sleep-deprived. Storage units, forwarding services, and hair dye for a baby who barely has hair to begin. We heard frantic movement inside. David ran to the window as Hannah tried to grab Nora and her bag simultaneously. I pounded on the door, screaming for my baby. Hannah froze at my voice. Then her face contorted with rage. She yanked open the door, holding Nora against her chest. Her eyes were wild, unfocused. She'd lost weight and her hair was greasy. She looked nothing like the sister who'd braided my hair all those years ago. She backed away as I stepped forward, clutching Nora tighter. Robert appeared behind her, blocking the back exit. Hannah spun around, realizing she was trapped. She pressed her face against Nora's head, whispering frantically. I could hear her calling Nora by Emma's name, promising they'd be together forever. My baby started crying at the tension. David moved slowly, speaking in calm tones about getting help. Hannah laughed, a broken sound that made my chest ache. She insisted we were the ones who needed help, that we'd stolen her baby and gaslit her for months. The delusion was complete. Tiffany had called Mom during the confrontation. She put her on speaker, hoping Mom's voice might break through Hannah's psychosis. Mom pleaded with Hannah to remember who she really was, to remember the sister she'd been. Hannah's face crumpled, but her grip on Nora didn't loosen. For 3 hours we stood in that motel room in a horrible standoff. Hannah wouldn't release Nora but couldn't escape either. She rambled about the pregnancy, describing Emma's kicks and the nursery she decorated. She'd rewritten history in her mind, erasing the loss entirely. Finally, exhaustion won. Hannah's legs gave out and she sank onto the bed, still holding Nora. I inched closer, maintaining eye contact. Her grip had loosened slightly. When I was close enough, I carefully lifted my daughter from her arms. Hannah didn't resist, just stared at her empty hands. David drove me and Nora home, while Tiffany stayed with Hannah. Robert called Hannah's therapist, who agreed to do an emergency session. Mom and Dad would drive Hannah back, hoping familiar surroundings might help. I felt guilty leaving her, but Nora needed stability and safety. At home, I examined every inch of my daughter. Hannah had taken good care of her physically. She was clean, fed, and unharmed, but she smelled different, like Hannah's perfume instead of mine. She fussed when I held her, turning her head, searching for Hannah's scent. My own daughter had been programmed to prefer her kidnapper. The pediatrician confirmed Nora was healthy, but noted she seemed unsettled. The disruption to her routine would take time to correct. She recommended keeping things calm and consistent. I threw out every item Hannah had touched, wanting to purge her presence from our home. David installed new locks and a security system. Every noise made me check on Nora. I moved her crib into our room, unable to let her out of sight. David understood, but worried about my hypervigilance. We were both traumatized in different ways. Hannah's therapist called with updates. Hannah was in a facility specializing in postpartum psychosis and grief. She still believed Nora was Emma, but was starting to accept she needed help. The medication was helping with the delusions, but recovery would be long. Mom visited daily, torn between her daughters. She brought photos of Hannah from the facility, looking lost and medicated. I felt anger and pity simultaneously. This wasn't the sister who'd raised me, who'd been my protector. Grief for that relationship hit unexpectedly hard. Tiffany helped me rebuild routines. She found Hannah had created social media accounts for Emma with hundreds of photos of Nora. Each caption detailed milestones and moments from Hannah's perspective as the mother. Reading them made me nauseous, but I needed to understand the depth of her break from reality. The mommy group members reached out with apologies. They genuinely believed they were supporting a mother separated from her child. Hannah's story had been so detailed, so convincing. She'd even posted about Emma's first smile, first laugh, creating memories that never existed for a baby who'd never lived. David struggled with trust. He installed cameras in every room and checked them obsessively from work. He questioned every visitor, even family. Hannah had shattered our sense of security. We started couples counseling to process the trauma together. 3 weeks passed in hypervigilant peace. Then Hannah escaped the facility. She'd convinced an orderly she was there voluntarily and walked out during a shift change. The police said without criminal charges, their options were limited. She was a danger to herself, but technically hadn't committed a crime they could prove. The manhunt felt personal this time. I knew Hannah's patterns, her thinking. She'd head for Nora again, convinced she was rescuing her daughter. I packed emergency bags and kept Nora within arm's reach. David took family leave from work. We wouldn't be caught off guard again. Tiffany monitored the online forums. Hannah had created new accounts, but her writing style was distinctive. She was posting about corrupt facilities and family conspiracies. The other mothers were concerned, this time recognizing the paranoia. Several reported her posts to moderators. Mom received a letter with no return address. Hannah's handwriting covered 10 pages detailing her version of events. She described the pregnancy, the birth, the conspiracy to steal Emma. She begged Mom to believe her to help her get her daughter back. Mom sobbed, reading the elaborate delusion. Robert tracked Hannah to a women's shelter 2 states away. She'd given them a fake name and sobbed story about escaping an abusive relationship. When they realized the truth, she'd already disappeared. She'd learned from our last confrontation, staying more mobile this time. I found myself checking Nora constantly for signs Hannah had been there. Every misplaced toy made my heart race. David installed motion sensors that alerted our phones. We were living in a prison of our own making, but it felt necessary. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Hannah's college roommate called saying Hannah had reached out asking to borrow money. She'd been suspicious and recorded the call. Hannah's voice was manic, talking about lawyers and custody battles that didn't exist. She'd mentioned staying with a friend from her grief support group. Tiffany cross-referenced the grief support members with Hannah's recent locations. One name stood out, a woman who'd lost twins and lived alone. She'd been active in encouraging Hannah's delusions early on. Her address was 4 hours away. This time, we involved Hannah's treatment team. Her psychiatrist agreed to come, hoping medical intervention might work better than family confrontation. 2 orderlies accompanied him in case Hannah needed immediate hospitalization. We formed a careful plan. The house was small and isolated. Through the window, we saw Hannah sitting on the floor playing with baby toys. No sign of Nora. She hadn't managed to take her again. She was playing out her fantasy alone, talking to an imaginary baby. The sight broke my heart despite everything. The psychiatrist approached first while we waited in the cars. Hannah answered the door, looking disheveled but calm. She recognized him and initially seemed receptive. Then she spotted our cars and her demeanor changed. She tried to close the door, but the psychiatrist kept talking. For an hour, he worked to reach her through the delusion. Hannah insisted Emma was napping upstairs. She described feeding schedules and sleep patterns for a baby who wasn't there. The friend who'd housed her watched from the kitchen, realizing she'd enabled something serious. Eventually, Hannah agreed to show the doctor Emma's room. It was a fully decorated nursery with everything except an actual baby. She'd recreated the nursery she'd planned months ago, down to the smallest detail. She reached into the empty crib, cradling air, cooing at nothing. The psychiatrist guided her gently to acceptance. Without Nora physically there, Hannah's delusion cracked slightly. She looked confused at the empty crib, then at her empty arms. For a moment, reality flickered in her eyes. Then she collapsed, wailing for her lost daughter. Her real lost daughter. The orderlies helped Hannah to the psychiatric transport van. She was voluntary this time, too exhausted to fight. As they drove away, I saw my sister's face through the window. She looked small and broken, finally grieving the baby she'd actually lost instead of the one she'd tried to steal. Back home, normally felt foreign. Nora was safe, but our family was shattered. David slowly removed some security measures as weeks passed without incident. I started leaving Nora with Mom for short periods, rebuilding trust. The hypervigilance faded gradually. Hannah's treatment progressed slowly. The psychiatrist said confronting her actual grief was agonizing but necessary. She'd built elaborate delusions to avoid facing Emma's death. Now she had to grieve both her daughter and the sister relationship she'd destroyed. Some days she remembered everything and was horrified. Other days the delusion crept back. I wrote Hannah letters I never sent, processing my own complicated feelings, anger at what she'd put us through, grief for the sister I'd lost, guilt for having what she couldn't, fear that she'd never fully recover, love that persisted despite everything. The therapist said these contradictions were normal. Mom struggled most. She'd already lost one daughter to death years ago. Now she'd effectively lost another to mental illness. She visited Hannah weekly, reporting small improvements. Hannah was starting to accept that Nora wasn't Emma, though she still sometimes slipped. David and I grew stronger through the ordeal. We'd faced something unimaginable and survived together. He stopped checking cameras obsessively. What drives someone to create a whole fake nursery and rock an empty crib while talking to? Hannah's mind built such detailed lies that she fooled grief support groups with stories about Emma's first smile when Emma never even lived to smile at all. I stopped startling at every sound. Nora adjusted to her normal routine, no longer searching for Hannah's scent. We were healing. 6 months later, Hannah was stable enough for supervised visits. The first one was in the facility's family room with her treatment team present. She looked like herself again, showered, healthy weight, clear eyes. She apologized profusely, horrified by what she'd done. She asked to hold Nora. I hesitated, every protective instinct screaming no, but the psychiatrist assured us Hannah was properly medicated and understood reality. David squeezed my hand as I carefully placed Nora in Hannah's arms. She held my daughter correctly this time as an aunt, not a delusional mother. Hannah studied Nora's face with wonder and sadness. She whispered apologies to her, to us, to Emma. She talked about her real daughter for the first time in months, acknowledging the death she'd been running from. Tears streamed down her face as she handed Nora back. The visit ended after 20 minutes. Hannah's doctor explained she'd need months more treatment before any unsupervised contact. I drove home feeling hollow, processing the strange normalcy of Hannah holding Nora without delusion. David kept glancing at me, gauging my emotional state. That evening, Tiffany discovered Hannah had maintained a backup email account we'd missed. The inbox contained correspondence with a woman named Margaret, who ran an underground network for mothers escaping unjust custody situations. Hannah had been building connections even while hospitalized, though her recent messages showed less coherence. I forwarded everything to Hannah's treatment team. Her psychiatrist thanked me, but warned that Hannah's recovery would involve setbacks. The delusions had deep roots in her grief. Some days she'd seemed completely lucid. Others, she'd slipped back into believing Nora was Emma. David returned to work reluctantly. His boss had been patient, but projects were piling up. I stayed home with Nora, slowly dismantling the fortress we'd built. The motion sensors came down first, then some cameras. Each removal felt like reclaiming our life. Mom brought groceries and stayed for coffee. She looked exhausted from weekly drives to Hannah's facility. She described Hannah's art therapy sessions where she'd drawn hundreds of pictures of babies. The therapist said it was processing, but Mom found them disturbing. All the babies looked identical. 2 weeks later, Hannah's roommate from the facility called. Hannah had been talking about getting her baby back again. The staff increased supervision, but the roommate wanted us warned. I reinstalled the front door camera and kept Nora's schedule unpredictable. Tiffany's husband upgraded our digital security after finding Hannah had attempted to access our cloud storage from the facility's computer. She'd been trying to download photos of Nora. The facility restricted her computer access after that, but it showed her obsession persisting despite medication. Robert checked in weekly, offering to investigate any concerns. He'd kept tabs on Hannah's former network contacts. Most had distanced themselves after learning the truth, but a few still believed Hannah's version. He monitored their communications for any plans to help her. The pediatrician noticed Nora had developed a strong startle reflex. Loud noises made her cry harder than typical for her age. The doctor said trauma could affect even infants and recommended consistent routines. I felt guilty for what our daughter had endured before she could even form memories. David found me crying over Nora's baby book one night. So many early photos included Hannah. I couldn't bring myself to remove them, but seeing her face made my chest tight. David suggested we make a new book focused on our family moving forward. The old one went into storage. Hannah's therapist requested a family session. I declined initially, but Mom convinced me it might help Hannah's recovery. David refused to go, still too angry. I understood but felt obligated to try. The session was scheduled for the following month. Tiffany discovered Hannah had been corresponding with her old grief support group through another patient's phone. She'd told them she was imprisoned for loving her daughter too much. The group moderator blocked her when Tiffany explained the situation, but damage was done. Several members had offered to advocate for her release. I started attending my own therapy sessions. The therapist specialized in family trauma and helped me process the complicated emotions. I grieved for the sister who braided my hair while fearing the woman she'd become. The therapist said both feelings were valid. Mom mentioned Hannah had started a job in the facility's library. It was part of her treatment plan, establishing routine and responsibility. She'd been reliable for 3 weeks, though staff monitored her closely around any materials about babies or parenting. One morning, I found a letter in our mailbox with no postage. My hands shook opening it, recognizing Hannah's handwriting, but it was different, lucid and remorseful. She acknowledged taking Nora, understood it was wrong. She said the medication helped her see reality. She begged for eventual forgiveness. David read it skeptically. He thought it might be manipulation, Hannah saying what she thought we wanted to hear. I wasn't sure what to believe. The handwriting looked steadier than before, the thoughts more organized, but trust felt impossible after everything. Tiffany researched the medication Hannah was taking. The antipsychotic had good success rates for postpartum psychosis but required strict compliance. Missing doses could trigger rapid relapse. She printed information about warning signs so we'd recognize any deterioration. The family therapy session approached with growing dread. I prepared notes about boundaries and expectations. The therapist said Hannah had been working on accountability, but warned me to maintain realistic expectations. Recovery from psychosis wasn't linear. David drove me to the facility but waited in the parking lot. Inside, Hannah looked healthier than our last visit. Her hair was cut short and styled. She wore regular clothes instead of hospital attire. She smiled nervously when I entered. The session was structured carefully. Hannah apologized extensively, acknowledging specific actions and their impact. She used Nora's correct name consistently. She talked about Emma as her deceased daughter, not conflating the two. Progress seemed genuine, but when discussing the future, cracks showed. Hannah mentioned wanting to babysit eventually being part of Nora's life. The therapist redirected her to focus on her own healing first. Hannah's jaw tightened slightly, a flash of the old delusion before she agreed. I left feeling unsettled. Hannah was improving, but the obsession lurked beneath medication and therapy. The therapist said this was normal. The delusion had been her coping mechanism for unbearable grief. Letting go completely would take years, if ever. Back home, I found David had rearranged Nora's nursery. He'd moved furniture to erase the layout Hannah had known. It looked fresh, different. He'd also installed a new lock, requiring fingerprint access. Paranoid maybe, but it helped us both sleep. Mom visited Hannah the next week and reported continued progress. Hannah had joined a grief support group for mothers who'd lost babies, a real loss group this time. She was sharing about Emma appropriately, though sometimes still mentioned Nora in ways that concerned the facilitator. Tiffany noticed Hannah's online activity had ceased completely. Either she'd truly stopped or gotten better at hiding it. We chose cautious optimism while maintaining vigilance. The cameras stayed up, the security system armed nightly. 3 months into treatment, Hannah's doctor proposed transitioning to outpatient care with strict conditions. She'd live in a halfway house, attend daily therapy, and submit to regular substance testing. Any violation would mean immediate readmission. The doctor wanted our input. David adamantly opposed it, fearing for Nora's safety. I felt torn between supporting Hannah's recovery and protecting our daughter. Mom believed Hannah deserved a chance at normal life. The conflict strained our already fragile family dynamics. After much discussion, we agreed to a trial period with conditions. Hannah couldn't come within 5 miles of our home, no contact with Nora until psychiatrist approval, weekly check-ins with her treatment team. Any attempt to see Nora would result in immediate intervention. The halfway house was 2 hours away, close enough for Mom to visit, but far enough to feel safe. Hannah moved in with 2 suitcases and tentative hope. She got a job at a local bookstore, started rebuilding a life without us. For 2 weeks, reports were positive. Hannah attended therapy, took medication, followed rules. Then she missed a check-in. The facility called immediately. They found her at a playground watching children play. She hadn't approached anyone, but the violation was clear. Back in the hospital, Hannah's condition had deteriorated rapidly. Without medication for just 3 days, the delusions returned full force. She insisted the halfway house was keeping her from her daughter. She'd been planning to come for Nora, convinced we were waiting for her return. The setback devastated Mom. She'd believed Hannah was healing. Now faced with the reality that Hannah might never fully recover, she struggled with anticipatory grief for a daughter still living, but lost to mental illness. I made the difficult decision to file for a restraining order. David had suggested it months ago, but I'd resisted, hoping treatment would be enough. Now, I needed legal protection for Nora. The judge granted it based on the extensive documentation of Hannah's actions. Hannah's lawyer contacted us about the order, playing hide-and-seek with emails while building a network of baby rescue believers. Hannah's turning mental health treatment into a spy thriller where the twist is everyone already knows the plot. Hannah felt betrayed, couldn't understand why we'd abandon her. The lawyer, clearly frustrated with his client, said he'd tried explaining, but Hannah insisted it was temporary until she could prove she was Nora's real mother. Tiffany helped us establish new routines without constant fear. We enrolled Nora in a small daycare, carefully vetted with strict pickup protocols. I returned to work part-time. Needing normally, life crept forward despite the shadow Hannah cast. 6 months after the restraining order, Hannah stabilized again. This time, doctors recommended long-term residential treatment. The facility specialized in severe postpartum disorders with years-long programs. It meant Hannah wouldn't be in our lives for the foreseeable future. Mom drove Hannah to the new facility. She said Hannah seemed resigned, perhaps finally understanding the severity of her condition. She'd packed Emma's ultrasound photos and a journal. No pictures of Nora. Mom saw it as progress, however small. I received monthly updates from Hannah's new treatment team. Slow progress with significant setbacks. She'd accepted Emma's death intellectually, but emotionally struggled. She still sometimes asked about her living daughter, but could be redirected to reality with therapeutic intervention. David and I focused on our own family. Nora grew into a curious toddler with no memory of her early trauma. We decided against telling her about Hannah until she was much older. For now, she knew Aunt Hannah was sick and getting help far away. The first year passed with cautious stability. Hannah remained in treatment, making incremental progress. She'd started corresponding with Mom through supervised letters, never mentioning Nora directly, but asking how everyone was doing. Mom shared selective updates. I found peace in small moments. Nora's first steps without checking for Hannah, family dinners without security cameras, bedtime stories without barricaded doors. The hypervigilance faded to normal parental concern. We were healing. On Emma's birthday, I sent Hannah a card through her treatment team. Simple acknowledgement of her loss. She responded with thanks and a poem she'd written about grief. No mention of Nora or delusions, just a mother missing her daughter who died. As Nora's second birthday approached, I felt conflicted about Hannah's absence. She was my sister who'd raised me, who'd been my protector, but she was also the woman who tried to steal my child. The therapist said holding both truths was part of healing. We celebrated quietly with close family. Mom took photos to share with Hannah someday when appropriate. David relaxed enough to enjoy the party. Nora laughed at her cake, unaware of the complex history surrounding her existence. That night, I tucked Nora into her toddler bed in her own room. No cameras, no alarms, just normal bedtime routine. David and I stood watching her sleep peacefully. We'd survived something unimaginable and come through scarred but intact. The restraining order would remain indefinitely. Hannah's treatment would continue for years. Our family had reshaped itself around mental illness and loss. But in that quiet moment, watching our daughter dream safely, I felt something I hadn't in so long. Simple contentment. Life had returned not to what it was before, but to something new. We'd learned to live with uncertainty, to find joy despite trauma. Hannah remained part of our story, our history, but no longer controlled our future. We were finally free. Thanks for sticking around while I tried to make sense of all these twists and turns. Definitely one wild journey until we crossed paths again. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.